And for the roundtable this week, we're going to talk about how schools are responding to the tragedy in Connecticut and the concerns that many parents may have. Wanda McQueen is with us. You are the project coordinator for the Coalition for Safe Schools, which is helping several school districts develop safety plans and hopefully prevent, but if necessary, deal with safety threats in the schools. Kevin Holbert is the principal of Keysville Elementary School, and also Jeff Sisson is with Champlain Valley Educational Services. You work with 17 schools in the area, developing safety plans and drills and helping with the Coalition for Safe Schools to carry those out. And we appreciate you all being here to talk about this week. Kevin, let's start with you. How difficult of a week has this been for you and your students and faculty?
It's definitely been a difficult week. When we heard about the situation that occurred on Friday, it was late Friday afternoon, and bits and pieces of that were coming out. We didn't have an opportunity really to address this at all with any of the families or the community. I just barely actually had an opportunity to address it a little bit with my faculty before the weekend. Then everybody goes through the weekend. I'm sure everybody can relate that you just go through all kinds of thoughts in your mind, and it was interesting because I even felt guilty for continuing on with things in life sometimes, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So anyways, we really spent a lot of time on the weekend with through the leadership of our superintendent, Paul Savage, as far as kind of organizing our collective effort and being prepared for Monday to start with. And we started the Monday off, and I did have a meeting with the staff, and we put a lot of things in place, and we really focused on trying to have a sense of normalcy and calmness. And so the first day, no matter what you do, there's going to be a few questions that parents have, or a few questions that the staff might have, or even the students. And it's just not a normal day after an event like that occurs, and probably shouldn't be, I guess. But I was just thinking today when I was coming down here after the day in school that today was the first time I really felt like it was kind of normal.
Getting back to
the routine, that kind of thing.
Did you acknowledge and address the shootings with parents or faculty or staff? And I guess people are probably wondering with the students, did the older students in the elementary school, did the teachers address it with them?
As I said, we were trying to keep things calm, but one of the things that was definitely clear is that we all had to be ready to be listeners, active listeners. And when you look into how you address this kind of thing with young children, my school has kindergarten through sixth graders, you want to kind of wait and see what they have on their minds. You kind of want to, you try to help them out based on their questions. In our school, most of the questions or comments that students had, or any kind of anxiety they had, were fifth or sixth graders. But we had our teachers prepared for that, as far as being able to listen and talk to them and be ready. And it was interesting because this happened with sixth grade in particular. Be ready, because the number one thing is they wanted to know what they could do to help. And that's also part of the process, not just to help the people in Connecticut, but for yourself, and for your own kids. Having that opportunity to have an opportunity to try to help kind of helps you as well. So we were kind of prepared for that.
Did you have parents who were worried or concerned, and how did you go about addressing that or reassuring them?
Well, one of the things we did as we were preparing through the weekend is we knew there were a few issues that we wanted to address with parents directly. Some things related to wanting to make sure they were clear. We wanted them to understand that we have a lot of things in place to be safe. So we reiterated with them through a message that we sent home through the students on paper, some things about our entrances and our exits, and what's locked, what's not locked, when it is, when it isn't, and basically just the kind of things that we've been doing all along to make sure that they understood that. So our parents, we've sent that out, and I think because we did that, we didn't get a lot of questions from parents, but I did get a few questions related to I had a parent that asked a question about their child and some of the questions they were asking them at home and how to address that. We had sent out a sheet of tips in terms of how to talk to your child, depending on their age level. Had a couple of questions about our entrances in the after hours, because we have a lot of organizations that use our school and kind of how we're addressing that. But not a lot of questions. I think that we did a pretty good job of making sure we sent information to them so they were very aware of what we're doing and the kind of the process that we're taking as a school district and in our building.
And will you now review your safety procedures
Oh,
and
yeah,
policies?
definitely. You mentioned the Coalition for Safe Schools. Osceola Valley's been highly involved in that coalition. So all along the way, the last 2 years, we've been involved in reviewing our safety plans. Jeff's actually been involved with helping us with that, and so we feel like we have a pretty good handle on that. But having said that, still we noticed, for example, that we needed to be more consistent with visitors. So we're pretty good with visitors overall, but what happens is when you're in an elementary school, you'll have parents that they want to stop in and they want to bring their snack down to the classroom, that kind of stuff. Our procedure and policy does not allow parents to do that. As you can imagine, they need to bring the snacks to the office or something like that, and then we will bring that stuff down for them, just so that everybody knows who's in the building, that kind of thing. So there's little things like that we've looked at as far as what we need to do to be more vigilant and careful with those things. But all along the way over the last few days, we've made sure we send information home to parents about those topics so they understand. So if they happen to be one of those parents that's used to maybe going down to the classroom once in a great while, that they'll know why we're telling them right now you can't. And they've been very good about it. Anybody we've had to talk to about that, they completely understand that.
And Wanda and Jeff, you work with school districts like Kevin's, 17 school districts in all. For the past couple of years, the Coalition for Safe Schools has brought together educators, law enforcement, mental health experts, basically a crisis team to hopefully prevent any threats or situations like we saw in Connecticut, but at the same time also help schools prepare to deal with situations like that. So after this past week and what's happened in Connecticut, have you been reaching out to your school districts to make sure that everyone is on the same page, and probably there are a number of questions coming from the school districts about whether we look at any of these policies, or do you think that everything pretty much will stay as it has been?
No, I think whenever, unfortunately, a situation like this always causes us to be a little more vigilant about our safety efforts, and in the school districts, especially when they have a lot of other mandates for state assessments and school accountability, teacher accountability for sure, the safety planning can kind of fall to the wayside as these things take priority. One thing this will do certainly will bring it back to the forefront. I know as part of the Coalition for Safe Schools, it's actually sponsored by a federal initiative known as Safe Schools, Healthy Students, and we're now in the final year of that project. It brought $4.3 million to the area to work on school violence prevention in 2008, and that allowed us to bring together the Coalition for Safe Schools. Because it's part of a federal initiative, just last week, I think it was the afternoon after the tragedy occurred, I received resources from DC, from the project's federal project officer, and asked that we share them with school districts that were part of the project. It was just yesterday that I was able to send those out, and I sent those out to all school principals throughout Clinton and Essex County, and certainly all of our 17 school districts as well, so they had those resources. Of course, locally, the coalition and just the regular Safe Schools, Healthy Students partners, also we have a listserv and some other mediums to share and have dialogue about issues that are evolving surrounding education. Of course, this one came to the forefront, and as part of that list, one of our listservs, resources were shared that were taking place on a local level. So I included those in this mailing yesterday afternoon to help assist principals and superintendents in trying to address this with their students and their staff, and certainly the community members.
Are your plans constantly evaluated and updated, and do you use this as an opportunity to do that again, or is that just an ongoing process?
That's an ongoing process for us as far as from a regional standpoint. I know we'll be talking about it and how we can, better our resources and our prevention efforts and our response efforts on a regional level, with including, outside the school district, so school district staff, but also our Office of Emergency Services and our law enforcement agencies and our mental health providers that would not only respond to a crisis such as this if it occurred in our area, but also what can we do to prevent something like this from ever occurring in one of our area schools. So we do that as an ongoing basis. This certainly will bring more dialogue and a fresh dialogue to that discussion and channel some new, like I said, new resources and hopefully funding that's been cut across the state and on the federal level will, when you're talking about social emotional programs and school safety efforts as well, hopefully that funding that has been cut over the past several years, certainly since our Safe Schools project came into be, there's been a lot of cuts. Hopefully those funding sources, they'll find new funding sources and bring those programs back.
We hear about the budget cuts that schools are facing. Does safety fall within that? And have the schools been forced to either hold off on implementing safety procedures or fortifying their schools or taking any steps because of budget cuts? Or are you confident that the 17 schools have done probably as much as they possibly can as far as making at least the schools safe, the building safe?
Well, I think that the schools that have had a building project in recent years, they're pretty good in terms of having, cameras or maybe doing exterior lighting and upgrade in that. There are a few schools out there that have not had a building project, and those schools, if they're looking for just government grants, that type of funding source, there really isn't a funding source federally for concrete items. If you want to have a grant to have somebody come in and do an evaluation of your district and say you really should put some more lighting here, you may want to look at this entrance, maybe you can redesign it. There's money for those types of things, but for actual concrete items like cameras and radios and that type of stuff, that's very rare, and I'm not aware of anything like that.
And many of the schools that participate are smaller rural schools, so when it comes to some of the things that people might think are pretty standard these days, cameras, extra lighting, ID passes and cards to get into locked doors, is that pretty standard for all of your schools, or are some schools still not at that point where they have that level of security?
Again, the schools that have had building projects recently, State Ed several years ago, they recommended that the next time you have a building project done, that you take a look at your main entrance and you try to engineer into it a set of double doors where the outside door has some kind of a scan or swipe card for somebody to enter, and then they'd have to be buzzed in. And again, most of the schools have had a building project, and they've actually incorporated that into their building security or district security. A few may be out there that don't, but it's definitely the majority. Definitely the majority.
And as we talk about the potential budget cuts, when schools started beefing up security a few years ago, a number of them added school resource officers, or at least on a part-time basis. Have we seen those positions eliminated over the years through budget cuts? And do you think this may force districts and communities to reevaluate the importance of school resource officers and whether to put them back in the schools?
The school resource officer program has been cut in New York State. We have several participants on the coalition that are part of the New York State Police, and that program has been cut, so much so that one school district is trying to find funding to bring in a school resource officer themselves because they felt it was such a valuable safety component for their district. They have not been able to find alternative funding to bring in to cover the cost of their own school resource officer. So we really do need now at the state and federal level, we need them to reevaluate those types of cuts, because when you're talking about what happened in Connecticut, and you can ask the other individuals here, we're not seeing anything that they did or any fault in their safety planning or their reaction and response to implementing their safety plan that could have prevented this from happening. This was a very unique situation when you think about school violence. Usually the perpetrator has some connection to the school, and that just doesn't seem to be the case. in this instance.
And there doesn't appear to be any lapse in security
There
or
doesn't seem that they
anything that
had-
people would point to and say, oh, if we had only done that differently.
They're not able to find any of that. As a matter of fact, the principal went to confront the gunman. I mean, you had a lot of heroism going on there. They had a lot of security at that school,
Right.
and it just was faulty because someone showed up with a rifle and
shot
went
his
through.
way into the school.
He shot his way into the school. If a school resource officer had been in that building, you have to wonder if the response would have been quite different. I believe Jeff was talking to someone just earlier today on the response time. If a school makes a call in our region, the response time to get to that school, it's minutes. But in an instance like this,
As we saw, 10 minutes and it was over.
It's
in
too,
Connecticut.
minutes is too long. So the school resource officer certainly may have been able to make an impact in a situation like that when their school safety plans seem to be flawless at this point.
And there may be a push to get more back in the schools?
Unfortunately, you generally find after school violence tragedies such as this that the state and federal governments pull money back and focus it on this, and and on funding things that may be more helpful to schools.
There has been a presence this week of police officers. State police have been in your elementary school, and I think, is that just for this first week to sort of try to reassure the community?
That's my understanding from what I've heard from the state police, is that they just really wanted to make sure they had an officer just have an opportunity to go into each school, just make sure things are going all right, everybody's feeling all right, at least for this week. So I know that we've had someone that stopped by each day, and they said they will continue to do so for this week.
And I know, again, being rural schools, there is the response time, but Jeff, you with the state police and others constantly work on drills. There are active shooter drills, so police are familiar with the schools, and staff and faculty and police in these communities have worked together on how to respond to an active shooter situation in the schools.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think what's difficult is when, after an event like this, I know we met with the faculty at Champlain Valley Educational Services, the BOCES, and speaking with the staff, you get the feeling that they want something new. Okay, so what are we going to do different? And then the sad thing for this kind of situation is, there's no magic, and I know it's a poor choice of words, but there's no magic bullet, right? Really what you have to do is focus and think of it as a time game. This is a strict time game. You hear shots. You as a teacher have to realize your first responsibility is protecting and securing those students and protecting them from any kind of harm, and then yourself obviously next. So you figure that you have to go over what your plan says, what you've been taught to do, what we drill, and a lot of times people that, well, yeah, I know that, but what else? And the what else, that is the what else. The what else is take a look at your procedures, what you're supposed to do in an active shooter situation. Become comfortable with them again. Revisit those things. And what I even suggested to them was use imagery to kind of do it, and just imagine yourself in that situation with everything going on, seeing yourself taking care of each one of those tasks in order that you're asked to do. Because you know what? That's what protects kids, is going over the things that we've developed over time through these incidents that we know are the best chance of survival for everybody in that room or in that school, is to follow this procedure. So get comfortable with those things, imagine and seeing yourself actually doing those things. So if it ever does come to pass, and obviously, we don't want that to happen, but if it does, at least you've, to some degree anyway, you've gone through that and you've done that in the past.
And Kevin, how often do we practice these drills? How often does your school practice this, or is this something that it's easy to become complacent if you get busy and you'll do it every few years, but really you say we ought to do this more often, or is it a top priority?
I know in El Ceibo Valley it's a pretty big priority. What we do, we definitely practice our lock-in drills. And I say lock-in drills because there's really a series of different types of drills that you could do, in terms of, you lock everybody in their rooms, do you just lock the outside of the building depending on the situation, do you send a certain hallway to the gymnasium that's a secure so there's different ways of doing that. So in our school, as far as guaranteed at least one per year for a lock-in drill of different types. Sometimes there may be two that we do, especially if we just kind of feel like there's two different scenarios we really want to go over. But then you also have your your evacuation drill outside of the building to get out of the building. And that's, we've learned through the coalition, through our meetings of our safety teams, that, we used to think that, well, we have our fire drills, and then we'll just kind of extend it from the fire drills and walk down to the bus garage or whatever. But you have to do a lot more than that to make sure that it works right, as far as having, all the information at your fingertips in terms of the families, the kids, their phone numbers, all the things that they were just dealing with at Sandy Hook. You have to have that ready. So we're pretty well prepared for that. But you're right, it's easy to get into especially right now with a new curriculum, with the state assessments, with the new evaluation system for the teachers, to get just focused on that. So again, it's certainly a reminder that those things still have to be your top priority.
And why do we mentioned that in Connecticut, again, it looks like the security system was in place, they did everything right. The broader discussion out of Sandy Hook has been mental health, and that is a component of the Coalition for Safe Schools. You have mental health professionals working with the school districts, trying to identify issues with students and potential threats early on, intervention that hopefully may pinpoint problems before it escalates to this point.
Right. Like I said, many times with school violence perpetrator, there are a lot of warning signs. Looking at Sandy Hook, it doesn't look like there were a lot of warning signs. So in that instance, the only chance you have to save lives is prevention. We often think it's the first responders, the law enforcement and the school's response teams that actually save the lives. Prevention is what saves lives. If it doesn't occur, you save all the lives. So we always want to focus our efforts there. And when we're talking about prevention, we need to really talk about school climate initiatives happening at the schools. And within those school climate initiatives, what you're trying to do is build a positive school climate where all the kids are connected and feel connected to the school, or at least one adult within that school. It's very cost effective to do this prevention piece. Kevin does a very good job at Keysville Elementary with this and has for years. And you want to build resiliency in kids so when they do come across things, certainly not hoping they ever have to experience something like happened in Connecticut last week, certainly not at that age either, but when they do come across that, they have the skills to be able to survive emotionally through that. And with the Safe Schools Healthy Students Project, it was one of our priorities to identify students that are at risk of mental health deficits, and then make sure that we could provide them the intervention services in a timely fashion that didn't cost them instructional time. And the way we did that is, first we came up with a free emotional screening tool that can be done on a student in 5 minutes or less. And it doesn't have to be done by a licensed mental health provider. Any school staff person could do it. A parent could do it for their own child. Daycare could do it for children going there. And then once they're identified as needing that service, then we've partnered with local mental health providers in both Clinton and Essex County to provide school-based mental health clinics on site at the schools where students can actually, parents don't have to miss work to take kids to appointments. Kids, in this rural area, if they have an appointment, whether it's mental health or just a medical appointment, they're gone for at least half a day or a full day of instructional time.
So it's through the school.
And it's through the school.
Parents don't have to worry about
They
getting
don't
them
have
to
to
these
worry about them
appointments.
getting there. It operates 12 months a year, so we have partnered with the schools, formed partnerships between the schools and the mental health agencies so that the mental health facility still runs during the summer months, because mental health doesn't go away just because they're on summer break. And
so you provide these services to the school districts. They don't have to worry about coming up with these costs. Another area that could ultimately be targeted for budget cuts, but this is
the Safe Schools
service you
Healthy
provide.
Students has spent the last 4 years making sure we established these school-based clinics. And one good thing about New York State is we have the option to have licensed satellite clinics. So what that means is our mental health providers will have their main office, say like Behavioral Health Services North here in Plattsburgh, but then they get a license by the state to operate at an alternate location. And when you're talking about a rural region such as ours, that's very important. We've chosen the schools to set up those satellite clinics. And BHSN and Clinton County Community Services and Essex County Mental Health have been tremendous partners in helping us team up with the schools and establish satellite clinics or mental health clinics that operate at least 1 day a week based on the need of the student population in any school that wants it in Clinton, Essex County. We've expanded it past the Safe Schools, Healthy Students project
Past your
districts.
partners to
Yes.
any school district.
So any school district that's interested, all they have to do is contact Champlain Valley Educational Services and let them know they're interested, or contact me directly, and we will assist them in getting one set up. We have a foolproof process for doing that. It has no cost to the school district itself because it's a licensed satellite clinic, and we will even train their staff to do the screening tools so they can identify youth young. That is the most critical piece if we're going to prevent things like this from occurring.
And Kevin, do you think that's making a difference? First, identifying issues with students much earlier than, say, high school when they're younger, and having those services provided. Do you think that it's probably helped a number of students who could potentially be bigger threats later?
Without a doubt, the clinics that she's talking about, which we have one in Keysville Elementary, and it's been a huge help as far as helping with some students that have had some significant problems, that they're trying to deal with at a young age. And you can, honestly, it doesn't take a rocket science. You can see the difference in those kids after a few weeks, and it really makes a big difference. But what she was really alluding to is, when we talk about having building safety plans in place and being ready to respond, that's a huge piece, no doubt. But without a doubt, I think in most principals' minds in this region is that when it comes to prevention, you really have to have an approach to that you're using. And I think schools around here, I'm very proud of the schools around here because they have a universal approach, first of all, where what are they doing for all students and all people in their community to have a positive climate, to have a good connection, to have a trust with their administrators. That's the first thing. You have to have that, have that. And then your next layer after that is, what are you doing with some of those incidences or those situations where some kids are having some difficulty? What do you have in place to help some of those kids, whether it's a mentoring program, whether it's your own school-based counseling? And then when the mental health clinics come into play, that's really kind of almost your third tier. After your first two layers of trying to make sure that you've got your prevention in place. Then what are you doing with some of the students or people within the community that are having significant problems that you don't know what direction they're going to go in if they don't get help? What are you doing to help them? And I think the schools in this area, the ones that I've been involved in, I've done an excellent job. Of course, the Safe Schools Project has helped with that to really, use that approach. And again, I wish I could guarantee you that nothing would ever happen, as a result of things like that. But I feel confident that we have things in place like that really make our schools safe. And I think that's more important than any of the other reactionary things, which you need to have in place. I guess I'm really proud of what the region has done as far as that.
Is there concern, though?
Real quick, I think it's interesting because, after Columbine, a lot of the emphasis was put on building security, right? And we talked about the entrances, and State Ed obviously has made the recommendation that all the schools have the swipe-in cards and extra security and sign-in. And we really focused on safety planning. We focused on drilling, and we did that for, about 8 years. But it was funny because, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, just started thinking more about prevention. The ounce prevention is worth ounce prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And I think that started just kind of resonating more with us, and thinking about, we started getting involved with anti-bullying campaigns and getting trained as bullying trainers, and looking at that, and that was it seemed like there was almost like a switch. Instead of the physical plant of the school was what safety was all about, whereas okay, well, we kind of have that. So let's look at what's the next thing. So let's look at what's happening inside the school, and let's see what we can do. The school climate, and all the great stuff that Kevin does with his students and getting them involved in the process and everything. And I think if you look at that, and really has been a lot of emphasis in that regard lately. And it's interesting because now we have what happened in Connecticut, and it's almost like it's not that it's brought it back, But it's funny how things tend to go in cycles. And I think we're going to look again, okay, now let's look at the building again. Maybe have we like forgotten about that so much? And when you look at what really happened in Sandy Hook Elementary, I don't think that that's the case. Something you might see in terms of building, addressing that is maybe the glass on the side of doors might be something that's a little more substantial now. Maybe it'll have the wire inside of it, something that's not
Or
so
steel
easy.
or something.
Yeah,
it's
something
quite
that's
as
not
easy,
quite
yeah.
as easy. But I mean, and it's kind of like the fire codes and building codes in New York State. I mean, they're this thick. Because anytime something happens that we realize, oh, that wasn't such a great idea, it becomes law. Okay, so we're going to make this improvement. And I think that, unfortunately, when things happen that are tragedies, we learn things from those things, and then they become additions to the book. So, I mean, I think that we're all going to have additions inside and outside from that. So you talk about the plant, but then you also talk about the climate, and you talk about the mental health aspects of everything.
Is the worry, though, that you get these services in place and then the federal funding may dry up, and then where do you go from here? Probably you're at a time where school districts can't come up with this money on their own necessarily to continue this.
Well, we're very fortunate in that the Safe Schools, Healthy Students Initiative on the federal level is intended to create a system change that's sustainable after the funding is gone. And when we're in instance of the mental health clinics that we're talking about, we have developed a system that maintains mental health clinics for the schools at no cost to the districts without any Safe Schools, Healthy Students funding. Again, this is free service. It's a free intervention. The schools can access it and have it available to their students, including possibly even addiction clinics. We've even decided this year.
And that will continue after your funding. When
That
does your
will
funding
continue.
run out?
The funding officially stops on June 30th. This will be our 5th and final year of
This coming
federal
year.
funding, where we used the $4.3
So
million
you're
to
taking-
put some of these systems in place. But what we're talking about right now about mental health clinics and available at the schools, we found a way to create a system that sustains those without any federal dollars, without any school or taxpayer dollars.
And that's good. Will other
That's fabulous.
parts of the program, though, have to be picked up, the cost picked up by the
There
local districts?
are a few programs, individual programs like our adventure-based learning program, which is another mental health program. It's an after-school and adventure outing kind of a program that will have to be find additional funding for us to sustain that. Districts could not pick that up. We also have a program known as FAST, Families in Schools Together, and that's a high-cost program to run and implement. So that would need additional funding that we have not found to keep that program in place. As far as the other pieces of the project, including the Coalition for Safe Schools, the Task Force Against Bullying, these are fully sustainable programs after the funding's gone. And I have to say with the adventure-based learning program, in one of our school districts, the parents, and I have to say it was our highest, our school district with the highest free and reduced lunch rate. The parents heard that it would end at the end of this year, where they wouldn't be able to offer it next year. Parents went to the school board and said, what do we need to do? We'll donate money ourselves to keep this in place. They see it as that much of a value to their children and to that community. So if you gather the data and you share that, I mean, people are willing to look at it a little more. But yeah, we are worried about the funding of a couple of our programs following this year.
Probably many parents wonder also at the same time, what do we do? How do we handle this at home?
Well, I think the most important part is that there's not a division between the school and the home. I know a lot of times parents feel like they shouldn't be addressing issues with the school should be left to handle it, or they're not sure how to address those issues, or for some reason aren't comfortable addressing those issues. You have students in the school sometimes that don't feel comfortable going to somebody. I think the important thing to know when you're talking about school safety is that everyone has a role to play. And it's a very simple rule. If you hear something, if you see something, tell somebody, report it. If you don't know the proper procedures because you're a parent at home that doesn't work with the school system and just you don't know what to do, it's very simple. Contact your school principal, contact your local law enforcement. They have procedures in place. You don't need to know what they are. You just made sure they get the information so that they can enact their procedures, put things in place and get things in motion to make sure that you thwart off any concerns. And I know some parents will say, well, I hate to bother the school. I don't want to be that parent. Don't worry about that. It's better to be safe than sorry. it's your child going to that school, and this, like I said, these procedures are in place, and like Jeff was saying, they just get better when you exercise them. So the most that you're going to do by reporting something that you heard, we hope that nothing happens as a result of what you heard, and it was just some comment that was made randomly with no intent to follow through on it. But you're at least giving them a chance to exercise their plan, so it's all good in the end.
And for the parents, is what we've been hearing is the best approach to offer limited information about this. If the children ask, then discuss it.
As far as as far as the specific situation that occurred, definitely when you're talking about children that are 5 years of age or 6, and I think about our kindergarten students, our first grade students. If there's certain questions that they ask, you have to be truthful with them. I mean, you can put it in language that they'll understand. I mean, there's no doubt that that's an important thing. But as far as limiting their exposure, sometimes in terms of what they hear about the situation, so on, they do have to do that to some extent. You have to have them be developmentally ready to be able to handle something that's that. I mean, I can barely comprehend it, to be honest with you. So I can't imagine what it's like for them. I definitely think, though, as you talk about students that are older and you start getting into students that are 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, you need to at least say something to them about, obviously you've heard about what occurred. How do you feel about that? And to kind of get a sense and then see if they open up. It's a huge piece that we've, kind of learned. And that's exactly what we told our 5th and 6th grade teachers, to be ready for that. And just, because it can come up at any topic, there's social studies topics where things like that can come up. They can come up with science class.
And have they had a number of questions from students?
I know the 6th grade has.
Yeah.
It's the very first day. And, but with the most interesting thing to me is and I think about this with what Wanda said, and that is that you have to build relationships with everyone. You build positive relationships with your students, with your community. I mean, I think as principals and as school districts, that's a huge responsibility for us, because that is how you're going to get somebody to trust the school enough to contact them, to call them and say, hey, I've heard this has occurred. I don't even know if it's true. I've heard this person say this. But going back to the students, the very first thing that my 6th grade teachers told me was that the students had stated, they feel terrible about it and they want to help, to me that says we're doing something right, as far as having people think about others. I mean, if you have the sense of empathy, the kinds of things that have occurred, that individuals maybe have done in isolated situations that are horrific, I think it's pretty hard to do that if you have a sense of empathy. So we led them in that, with that. We weren't really sure what the best thing for them to do was. They had mentioned they wanted to write letters to somebody, to at least let them know that, it's far-reaching all over this country. We care, and so we gave them the address of the superintendent at the superintendent in Newtown, and because I can't imagine what her job's like right now either, and plus she would be the kind of person that would know who to give these letters to, and the kids are, they're in the process right now of writing letters, it's going to help our kids, as far as handling that situation, feeling like they helped in some way. So I think that's just an example. I guess I'm just trying to show you that it's the relationships that you want to have in the whole community within your schools that'll give people the trust to fill you in on what's going on or what you're feeling.
And I think, too, that when we talk about that, whether we're talking about what's happening outside the school or inside the school climate-wise, harassment, with the whole DASA law kind of, I mean, you have to have that trust between the parents and the school. I mean, if there's an harassment issue in the school, there should be contact between both sets of parents, and having those discussions and teaching. But one of the interesting things with school safety is, and one of the things that's hardest for parents to do, is when there actually is an incident. God forbid there is an incident. Unfortunately, what happens in most cases is there's this, everybody goes right to the school. And obviously they're concerned about their child. Right. They want to protect their child. They want to take their child away from that situation as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, what happens many times is that they get in the way. And so as a school security safety person, it's difficult because you want them involved in the situation, but you have to reiterate that sometimes you need to trust us and that we are practiced at protecting your child. and that if you come too early, you might get hurt, first of all, and second of all, you might actually keep, or I guess you might delay help getting to your child because they're trying to keep you away instead of, they're doing crowd control issues, things like that,
Right.
instead of actually going in and helping clear
The
a
natural
school or
instinct,
something.
though, is to
And-
rush.
And it
Right.
is, but parents just have to keep that in mind, that the schools are practiced, law enforcement is practiced at doing it, or they practice doing this, and that they really need to just bide their time and hold on and wait until they get the okay, and they'll get a message that you can come pick up your student at wherever it might be. But to rush to the school and try to gain entrance to the school is not the right course of action.
Yeah. Very good.
I think it's important to note, though, as from a regional standpoint with the Coalition for Safe Schools, is that's one of the topics that came up, because as a parent, we all at the meeting where this came up, even the law enforcement people said, "I'm going to that school," and it was important to know that because, like Jess said, there is a lot of reasons not to go to that school, but the one reason that's going to make you go is your child's there. And so it's important for schools to work with Office of Emergency Services in developing safety plans that account for that probability and make sure that they set up staging areas, and they have staging areas that are in locations that are far enough away that they don't interrupt, but they also help the parents feel like they're there. If they need to be accessed or their child needs them, they are there. People know they're there, and the first responders can get to them and reunite them with their child as quickly as possible. So that was a discussion at a Coalition for Safe Schools meeting, and Sandy Hook did an absolutely great job of doing that as well. So they really did a good job down there given the circumstances, I think.